We're going to be reading today letter number 21. So, as a famous rabbi once said, before I speak, I like to say a few words. So, a little background story. In 1877, which is about 7 years before this letter was written, this letter, we approximate, was written about 1874 or 75. There was a big movement of Hasidim, 300 Hasidim, under the leadership of Rav Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk and the Alter Rebbe, to go to Eretz Yisrael. I think they had middle seats on El Al. They're walking, and it's a big, giant job, as you can imagine. And the Alter Rebbe was part of this Aliyah movement. When they got as far as a city called Mohylav, I can't tell you exactly, it's in the eastern border in Belarus or right Russia, they implored the Alter Rebbe not to abandon the people in Russia. And so the Alter Rebbe essentially gave up this Aliyah movement, and he stayed behind. And Menachem Mendel Vitebsk and this group of about 300 Hasidim made Aliyah. And that's why when people say, how long has Chabad been in Chicago? How long has Chabad been in Eretz Yisrael? Since the late 1700s. And Menachem Mendel Vitebsk wound up settling in Tveria, one of the four holy cities of Eretz Yisrael. And there are families to this very day who still live in Eretz Yisrael who are descendants now 300 or whatever many years later from that initial Aliyah. The Slonim family, these other families. Now, things at that time were very, very difficult. And I mean, all joking aside, people were starving to death, literally. And so the Alter Rebbe established a program which exists to this day, which is called the Kollel Chabad. It's not a kollel like we think of a learning institute, but it's an all-inclusive, that's really what the word kollel means, an all-inclusive tzedakah fund. And it exists to this very day. Obviously, right now their biggest emphasis is Chabad victims of terror. They do the war orphan bar mitzvahs. They do heat subsidies. Next time you're in Eretz Yisrael, if you're staring at the Kotel, up to your left, there is the Kollel Chabad headquarters, established in 1777 or something like that. Just as an example, we know that before we go to the oil and so on, we give tzedakah. Well, where did the Rebbe give his tzedakah? Kollel Chabad. And just to share two stories, not directly relevant to this letter, but Rabbi Duchman, who runs the Kollel Chabad for the last 50, 60 years at this point, so he gets this check from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe was an extraordinarily meticulous record keeper when it came to finances. No shenanigans. So he wants a receipt. So how do you write a receipt? So he writes like we would write, Kvoi Kedushas Admor, Shlita, receipt for this. So the Rebbe gets this, and the Rebbe says, I don't know if the IRS will accept this. So the Rebbe always maintained a very engaged and meticulous involvement in all of the operations of the Kollel Chabad. Just as an example, Rabbi Duchman, in the very beginning, everything that he did, he went through the Rebbe. So they had a meeting, literally like a meeting to plan a dinner, a fundraising dinner. So they sent the itinerary into the Rebbe, just what they're going to do at the meeting. And the Rebbe says, you don't even mention that Kollel Chabad was founded by the Alter Rebbe. Like even on this itinerary for something seemingly just procedural, not important. So it was a very, very near and dear tzedakah, as one can imagine, doesn't require any further elaboration. What could be more important? Now, at that time, the Alter Rebbe's audience are not wealthy people, the way we think of it, who are contemplating going on some vacation rather than supporting the Kollel Chabad. And that there was an enormous push, and many of the letters that we're going to encounter in this section of Tanya are all about supporting the Kollel Chabad in Eretz Yisrael and about the concept, Baruchni, spiritually, of tzedakah, and specifically the distinctive characteristic of tzedakahs that are given to Eretz Yisrael. Now, in this letter, we will explore a campaign or a sort of a message that the Alter Rebbe emphasizes about the value of giving tzedakah daily. Now, this would seem to be an obvious thing. However, remember, at that time, how did you get the money to Eretz Yisrael? I mean, again, it's something like we wouldn't even think of, but how do you physically? So there would be couriers who would go. So the courier came once a year, twice a year. So a person might think, why is there a value in my putting money aside every day? It's just going to sit on the shelf for 3 months, 4 months until the courier comes. Why don't I wait until the courier comes? And then I'll make my donation and my support for the people who are establishing this initial toehold in Eretz Yisrael. And the Alter Rebbe, somewhat counterintuitively, sort of pushes back against that and talks about the value of doing it every day. Now, this is a value that exists at the human level. It's like a training. How do you get good at something, proficient at music or at any practice? It's repetitive behavior. It becomes a kind of muscle memory that becomes embedded within your physical nature. So that's got a value to it. And it has, as the Alter Rebbe will describe, a kind of, I'll use the word Kabbalistic value that builds up in the multiple times of doing it. Now, at a purely sort of psychological level, there's two ways that a person can, I guess, give tzedakah. It's not only tzedakah, it's really basically anything. One is, I do it every day. It becomes part of my routine. And another way is, maybe this is a little cynical, but it's like, okay, I hold my nose, I do it. It's like, okay, we have to do our taxes. So I never want to do it. I never want to do it. Okay, I have no choice. I have to do it. We sit down with all pieces of paper. It's so annoying. And then we look for this and we look for that. And we just sort of plow through it somewhat embitteredly or regretfully. It's like, okay, I have to do it. And that's not what we're looking for.
No.
We're looking for it to become embedded in our behavior, so that it is not only done with enthusiasm. Again, the concept is that it becomes part of the very fabric of our identity, that we are constantly doing this. It just becomes almost a reflex in doing it that way, which, this is what we understand about much of Yiddishkeit. The Rebbe once used the analogy, it's like the firemen. What do firemen do most of the day? Not a lot, and hopefully not. But they're ready, when the fire alarm goes, they snap in. You say, these guys are sitting around, whatever they're doing. And then boom, the fire alarm rings. They know exactly what to do. Why? Because they train and train until they don't even have to think about it. It just happens instinctively. And this is also the value of doing the little stuff. Even though you think, well, it's just going to sit on the shelf for 6 months until the courier shows up. What's the value? But that's the idea. It's there again and again and again and again. And it also is, don't put off till tomorrow what you can do today. This is a very profound message that we always talk about. In Hebrew, the word is zrizus, to be done with expedience as quickly as possible at the first opportunity, not to wait. And again, even though the person might say, well, it's not getting to the poor people anyway. But again, it becomes part of it and so on, as a discipline, etc. And this is a real profound lesson that we note from the Rebbe often. And sometimes it almost seems like the Rebbe deliberately did that, like gave people like this impossible task and do it in a week. Why didn't you think of it 2 weeks ago? Well, maybe that's the lesson. If we would have thought of it 3 weeks ago, it would have taken you 3 weeks. So I tell you to do it in a week, you'll do it in a week. You think, oh, it's impossible. There is actually just a mild, a short story. It's relevant to Lag BaOmer. 1 year on Lag BaOmer, the Rebbe gave out, this was in 1990, it was also a Sunday, and it was the big parade, a commemorative coin. So the Rebbe said that he wants them to make this coin, and gave them, it was like 2 weeks, and they were freaked out. You can't do, there's no way. No, everyone does, impossible. It takes a month, Again, today, things are a lot, it's impossible, but like they had no choice, because they found some coin maker, like literally in Italy, and he could do it, and then somebody was coming, and they did it. And you think, okay, so why didn't the Rebbe think of it 2 weeks earlier? So they might say, well, these are Rebbeisha things. This is when the idea came. We don't know. Or maybe that's sort of the lesson. You think it takes a month, and normally it does. But you know what? If you have that pressure to do it, you will get it done in 2 weeks. But I made 5 phone calls, make a 6th phone call, and you keep hunting around. And when you know you absolutely have to do it, you will find a way to do it. So I'm not saying to deliberately leave things to the last minute, but there's a value in sort of embedding within our mindset that you can get this done far more quickly than you think. It doesn't have to take the month or whatever, as we described. Okay. After this lengthy introduction, we are ready for letter 21. So it starts off here with an abbreviation. This is a somewhat common abbreviation. The letters Aleph, Dalet, Shin, which stand for Acha Drishas Shalom, after inquiring for your well-being. It's like the classic thing, hello, how are you? I didn't even wait for the person to answer. I just keep talking because I'm not really that interested. It's just sort of an introductory. But of course, here the Alter Rebbe is communicating that he's not just giving them a lecture, and that's why we call these letters. They're not letters like we would write to a friend, but it's a communal form of communication, and therefore it begins with my seeking your welfare. And again, the recipients of these letters are not worried, oh, he's trying to take something from me or hurt me, and so on. Kimishpat oivei shmei, like that which is justified to those who love his name. And this is a biblical reference that the Alter Rebbe is appealing to people who love God's name. And there's a little bit of a duality here. One, they are, and the other is, yes, you are. Like, meaning we have somewhat of a tendency to say, well, this is for other people, this is for holy people, this is for righteous people. It's not for me. I'm just a guy. But he's saying, no, I am sending this to you, and the fact that you're receiving it means, we find this with the Frierdiker Rebbe and our Rebbe for sure, every letter is addressed to Ish Yerlikim Nechbad Benayla, the person who fears God. He's like, I'm sorry, I got someone else's letter. This isn't for me. Every letter, person was blessed. They write a letter, they had a child, they're getting married, a bar mitzvah, whatever. They get this letter with all these laudatory titles, and they think, this is a mistake. I'm not this guy. And the point is, yes, you are. You can be that person. And so by addressing you in that manner, you are, I guess, motivated, whatever the word is, spurred to become that person. So when the Alter Rebbe addresses us as Ohevei Shmoi, those who love his name, that is you. Even though you might think, well, no, this is not me. And so, El HaMesnavdim Ba'am La'ases Tzedakos Hashem Im Atzei Hakodesh. To those who have so devoted themselves amongst the people, and again, this seems to say, well, this is for special people. No, this is for you. You're one of the special people. You are that person. This is very much a concept that we are familiar with. Nobody gets to be just a spectator, and nobody gets to say, well, I just want to dip my toes in. And, in a way, sometimes this is what makes it difficult in Chabad, because as soon as a guy shows up, we're sort of, you're like, you're in. Well, I don't want to be in. I just sort of want to stand on the side and observe. Well, we need all hands on deck. So this is described to those who are the donors, but not just about donating financially, but they are committed, maybe that's a better word, to do what the Alter Rebbe describes as the tzedakah Hashem, the tzedakah for Hashem mamash. Now, what is tzedakah Hashem? Everything is the tzedakah for Hashem. It's a mitzvah. That is the distinctive characteristic of Artzai Hakodesh, to do tzedakah with Eretz Yisrael. And this is that idea. Again, in Chabad, we don't have this mass, everybody must make aliyah. But one of the values is, well, why should I mow my lawn here? I mow the lawn in Eretz Yisrael, I'm taking care of Hashem's land. Everything I do in Eretz Yisrael is nurturing Hashem's land. It's not just the utilizing the physical for the service of Hashem, which is, of course, everywhere. And, of course, the concept of we have Machda Eretz Yisrael, we have to treat every circumstance and so on. But, it's still special. It's like every day is holy. But Yom Kippur is still Yom Kippur. Every place is holy, holy, holy. Well, Yerushalayim is still holier, holier, holier. So the Alter Rebbe addresses this. And again, as we know from the background that we mentioned, that the Alter Rebbe himself was sort of on this path, but because the people needed him in Russia, so he decided to stay. And again, not because of the material benefits and so on. So these were people who the Alter Rebbe is addressing, who are the people who are supporting the Koil Chabad and understand the distinctive characteristic of doing, again, what the Alter Rebbe describes as God's tzedakah. This is God's land. Of course, every land is God's land, but here it's a little more obvious. And what was their common practice? Lases midei shana b'shana, to give every single year. And we know the word shana, which just simply translates as the word year, also is the concept of a cycle. It's repeated. Mishnah comes again and again and again. That's what a year is. It's something you can rely upon. Chok hakotzuv, an absolute set amount. They had that. And again, like, we're not talking here halachically, but we know just from our own experience, when people are in the practice of doing something, then people start to rely on it. And again, the people who went to Eretz Yisrael at that time, 1770, this is 1785, whatever it was. I mean, it wasn't because they were lazy. I mean, there was real Mesiras Nefesh going on. And they were really only reliant on the Hasidim back in Russia. And it's not like they had constant communication and even reliable, couriers, et cetera, et cetera. You can imagine what that meant. So the Alter Rebbe says, you who have invested in this process, you have taken this obligation. The monies that were given to the Holy Land may be rebuilt speedily in our days. Alehem to you, titoif milsi v'tizal. So this is a poetic term. I turn to you that my words should flow like dew. Now, what is the analogy of dew? So we know that we have two prayers or two seasonal requests. One is for dew, which we're saying now, Morid Hatal. And in what we call the winter, they pray for rain. So what is the difference between rain and dew? Each one has. So rain not everybody likes rain like today. We don't always like rain, because rain, if you're outside, is not so much fun. Yes, if you're a farmer, you need rain, but dew, sort of like speak, everybody loves dew. Everybody loves the morning dew. Nobody has any inconveniences from dew, but rain is not that way. So it's partially this idea that the Alter Rebbe says, we are reaching out to you for something that is like incontrovertible. You can't argue with giving tzedakah to Eretz Yisrael. There's no downside. I mean, just as an analogy, sometimes I encounter people, they don't like religion, they don't like this and that, but they want Kaddish. I always tell them, Koil Chabad. I mean, who could be against war orphan bar mitzvahs? Who could be against victims of terror Chabad? Who could be against helping people with food and, the most basic thing? It's not a yeshiva, it's not orthodox, it's the most generous thing. So it's like dew. You can't argue with it. Who could argue with Mois of Eretz Yisrael? Lizares lizrizim. And here the Alter Rebbe uses this phrase, to hasten the hastened, to hurry the hurried. And this is that classic thing. If you want something done, give it to the busy person. The reason why they're busy is because they do things. And the reason why the person isn't busy is because they don't want to. So who do you hasten? You hasten the hurried. You kickstart it into the people who are already shown themselves to be in this mindset. So like, what do you want from us? We're the good guys, right? That's why I'm turning to you. And again, a little bit like we were talking about, I don't want to, I guess the word is strategic. I'm calling you the people who are hastened, and then you'll be that. Just like we talked about, when you address the person with all these lofty accolades, they become that. They rise up to the expectation that is placed upon them. So lezares lizrizim, ulechazik yadayim rafais, and to strengthen their hands that have become weak. Now the word rafais, which we translate as weak, I mean it's a little like insulting, but there's another characteristic to it. Actually, I'm not sure what a better translation would be. But in Hebrew, there's a word rifyoin, which is not just about weak, like I could only lift 50 pounds and not 60 pounds, but it's like an attitude. It's like helpless. That's too harsh. It's like a surrender. It's like, I give up and I can't do it. It's that characteristic. It's not, again, about physical strength or here about monetary capacity. It's more like the Alter Rebbe is addressing a kind of perspective, a little bit of a helplessness and who am I, and this is for other people kind of thing. So that's what the Alter Rebbe says. He's coming to strengthen hands that have a little bit kind of given up almost. The Matan Domin Mois Eretz Yisrael, as far as giving this money to Eretz Yisrael, and this is the point, Midi Shabbos b'Shabbatay, at least every week. Now it says Shabbos here, which doesn't necessarily mean Shabbos the way we think of it, but this is often quoted in giving tzedakah specifically to the Koil Chabad before lighting Shabbos candles. This is a particular emphasis. There's also that idea, it's called Rameir Balanes. You may be familiar with that, I don't know exactly what it means. How do you qualify to be a Rameir Balanes tzedakah? If you help people find things that they lose, works every time. But this is where Koil Chabad, or Koil Chabad is called a Rameir Balanes tzedakah. And this is a particular emphasis that when people give their tzedakah on Friday before lighting Shabbos candles, they should give it to Koil Chabad. Not only to Koil Chabad, but this is often quoted because it's Midas Shabbos b'Shabbatai on Shabbos. Obviously, not giving to my financial tzedakah, but you get the idea. Okay. Midas Chodesh b'Chodshay, or at least every single month. And this is a scriptural quote. This is a sort of scholarly way of speaking. You quote a verse instead of just writing it out in the more vernacular. The relevant amount of what has been established for that year's gift. So the person's giving $52 to give $1 a week or whatever it is. You do the proportionate amount and you give it. And again, this is going to become part of the emphasis, not just about the sum total, but about the daily giving. So of course, as far as the recipient is concerned, he's only interested in the lump sum that he receives. But as far as the donor is concerned, there is a transformative characteristic to a person being in this mode of giving, which only comes about through the repeated, practice kind of thing. V'chol kesef hakedoshim asher ola alev, whatever this holy money, and as Chassidus often points out, whenever a person is giving or doing a portion, so Hashem wants, 15% of your time, 1 day out of 7, and so much hours. But it's not just those hours. That means everything about your week, because you're, like we say, today's 1 day till Shabbos, 2 days till Shabbos. So even though Shabbos is only 1 day, it elevates every day, because that's how you get to Shabbos, is through having Sunday proper and Monday proper and Tuesday proper, et cetera, et cetera. So every aspect of what we do that is overtly, obviously for Hashem, raises everything else that supports that, because I only get to Shabbos because I have Sunday, Monday, et cetera. Well, the same thing is true, and maybe in an even more obvious sense, when I'm giving a percentage of my money to tzedakah. So if a person has $100 and he gives $10 to tzedakah, well, really all $90 that quote unquote he's not giving are contributory. That's how he gets to the $10 to give to tzedakah. Okay. So that's why it's called the holy money. And again, not just the money that he's actually giving, but all of his money is considered to be holy money. Asher ola alev ish, that is come up upon his heart. Again, a sort of poetic phrase that's elevated up upon his heart. Lihisnadev. Lihisnadev means to pledge, but it means like to be devoted to something. I mean, in U.S. Jewry, sort of pledge is almost half a joke, but it means here that he sort of devoted himself. Bli neder, okay, without the stature of an oath, because we're real careful about oaths. We don't like making oaths if we can avoid it, and so on. Leparnasses achenu, for the support of our brethren, Yoshli Eretz Hakodesh, who are settling or dwelling in the land, the Holy Land, Midei Shana b'Shana, every single year, because again, not so much in this letter, but we'll see in other letters, it was really rough times there. I mean, literally there was starvation. I mean, it was a very, very difficult times that the Jews who went to Eretz Yisrael at that time endured, not only from the unwelcomingness of the locals, but just physically for survival. It was a very, very rough time. Okay. Kihine Mavada Yedu L'chol Goydel Ma'as Hazriza. So here the Alter Rebbe starts to talk about and address this essential question, which is, why is it valuable that I do this today? The courier is not coming for 6 months. So seemingly, I'll take care of it then. So the Alter Rebbe is going to address this issue. So in general, we have a general principle about the role of what we call in Hebrew, it's rizus, which means hurriedness, not hurry like rushing, but to do things and to do it immediately, to seize the opportunity. And we have this in halacha. There's an example for that we don't make weddings during Chol Hamoed because we don't want to mix the celebration of the wedding with the celebration of Chol Hamoed. But it is permissible to make. I mean, it's not like an engagement, I guess, on Chol Hamoed. Why? Because maybe someone else is going to get engaged, or like we're going to override our general preference to sort of not crowd each other out because the value of zrizis, of doing it early. Now, this is not such a Chabad thing, but there are people, I mean, even here at the Brisk on Divan, they daven at the first crack of dawn. I mean, they're having minyan at 4:30 in the morning in the sun. And if you've ever had this experience, I don't know what it would be like for the women, but at the Kotel, I mean, I've done this, they get there and then they have this atomic clock and whatever exact second it is, it's one of the most intense moments. So everybody's, milling about, it's noisy. And then boom, when it's that second, it's like absolute silence and everyone says the Shema together. It's really profound. I mean, you have to get up at 4 in the morning, but it's worth it. I did it one time. I mean, it's really a tremendous thing. It's this idea of reason. Here are all these people. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Here are all these people, and everybody's, milling about it, and you see the unity because everybody's staring at that clock. Ashkenaz, Sfard, all the different versions of the davening, but everybody's absolutely fixated on that clock. And when it goes, whatever the time is, boom, everybody stops, and then they say the Shema together. It's pretty intense. So this is a general rule when it comes to zrizis. And again, here you might think, well, what's the zrizis? I'm not delivering it anyway. That's why there might be this hesitation. Again, I'm just putting it in the pushka, as we would call it, and it's not going there until the courier comes. Hanema v'nishna b'divrei Razal, which is repeated and repeated again and again throughout all of Torah. I mean, we get this again and again. This is like an absolute about the value of doing something as immediately as possible and not waiting and not saying, I'll just do it tomorrow. And again, everybody's got a story about I waited until whoopsie, it was gone. I thought I'd go later and it was gone, etc. So we all can understand this general rule.
I think in Pirkei Avos.
Look at you, that's exactly right. Lo'ilam yaktim adam l'dvar mitzvah, exactly a quote from Pirkei Avos, precisely, that says a person should always be the first one to come forward and do the mitzvah. I even wrote down where it is here. Pirkei Avos 3:15. Excellent. A person should always be first to come and do it. And again, the obvious reason is because otherwise it gets lost. You went to do it, it was done already or was missed, and you missed the train. But it also, again, builds in a certain character trait, sort of like we would say a psychological imprint that I become eager to do mitzvahs. And eagerness is the ultimate defeat of the animal soul, which likes laziness. Laziness is never going to be a virtuous characteristic. Again, even in the secular world, they understand this. And certainly in Torah, because if we truly see the value and the virtue and the longing to be in the close with Hashem, we're eager to do it. And we're not just going to say, well, when I get around to it. We want to do it. We want to jump for it. We're excited and so on. Impatience in that sense is a virtue. Instead of saying, well, I'll wait till it's my turn and so on. And it's really, it feels like being, be eager, but don't be be patient, but don't wait around. This is a complex thing. But I guess, I assume everybody understands this idea. Okay. Now look what the Alter Rebbe says here. It's a pretty shocking statement. He is referencing the story of the Hakodesh. So just quickly, Hashem comes to Avram after many, many tests and challenges and adventures, etc., rough times. And Hashem says to Avram, please, the phrase is kach na, take please. And why does Hashem have to say please? Not just because he's being polite, because Hashem is saying, it's like a funny thing. I understand that this is going to be like most difficult. And think of what Abraham has been through already. Take your son, your only son, Isaac, and bring him up to be slaughtered. Now, this is unimaginable. We can't even think about it and so on. But the Alter Rebbe says, that's not the big deal. That's not the impressive part, that Avram was willing to slaughter his son. Okay, this is for Avram, etc. And it's like, what? What's the impressive thing? Is that he did it immediately. He woke up early the next morning, saddled his own donkey. Because in the instruction, at no point does Hashem say when to do this. At no point does Hashem say, do it first thing in the morning. He just says, do it. Okay, I'll do it next week. I'll wait around. So what the Alter Rebbe says, which is really kind of shocking, not no shocking is the right word, but it's really it catches your attention here is, he says, the zrizas, the immediacy of Avram Avinu is what stands for all time. Look what he says. Ki ha'akeda atzma, the akeda itself, the binding of Isaac itself, that's not such a big deal. I mean, we're like, what? You can't even imagine. Okay, he's talking about for Avram, as he says here, le'erech malas Avram Avinu olav hashalom, relative to Avram, it's not such a big deal. Again, not such a big deal is not even fair. It's not as great a test. He's Avram Avinu. We understand that he, again, even though this violates everything about any natural parent-child relationship, and it violates everything he knows about Hashem, which is not about, child sacrifice. And it violates even the promise that Hashem specifically made, that this child is going to be the one to be your eternal legacy and carry it on. So again, you can't even say it out loud. Slaughtering him, that's not the greatest thing about it. Again, he's not saying it's not challenging, but it's not even that big. What is the greatest thing? That Avram did it the next morning. He didn't delay. He didn't wait around. It's the zrizis of it. And again, the message being that we should be as zrizis, as zoriz would be the proper term, as eager and quick to do it as that would be. Ki Hashem diber boy. Why is it not such a, again, I want to say it's not a big deal, but why is it not so shocking? Because again, Hashem asked him. Hashem asked you, you have no choice, you got to do it. Again, easy to say, and then not so easy to do, but again, for Avram Avinu, so Hashem said it. And he said, Kach no es bincha, and he said, please. So Hashem conveyed that this was extraordinarily important. So he understood, that is, Avram Avinu would understand just how all-consuming this would be, and therefore the fact that he was willing and he did it is not the most outstanding aspect of it. Again, not to diminish it in any way, but that he did it right away. And again, as we know, although Abraham was the first, so therefore there's a certain value to that, tragically in our history, we know there were many times, and there wasn't a test, and Hashem didn't pull him out at the last second, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have to elaborate on all these terrible tragedies of people who did go to their death or even whatever. We would have even to say that we don't hold them up as the model. Now, again, the fact that Avram was the first, so he didn't have anyone to look to, they could always look to Abraham. He didn't have a predecessor, so being the first is always the most difficult. But again, it's not a competition here. The point the Alter Rebbe is trying to emphasize is the distinctive characteristic that makes the Akedah, the centerpiece of all, is that it was done instantaneously. And this is the point that the Alter Rebbe is trying to bring home to us, is to do something immediately. He did it wondrously quickly. He didn't even wait. He could have gotten up a regular time, but he woke up early in the morning. And he saddled his donkey himself, even though he had many servants who he could have assigned this to. He showed this instantaneous characteristic to it. Now, just to play this out for another moment, really more about the Akedah than this, the Medrash does tell us that along the way, it was a 3-day journey. Why is it a 3-day journey? Because Hashem is trying to give him the chance, or the test, better, of, well, maybe this, reconsider. Because sometimes when something is done instantaneously, it's just like I hold my nose and jump in the deep end. It's not always a sign that I'm fully committed. And that's why we have to be careful, get rushed into things and hurry now, last minute type of thing. So, okay, that's just a sort of a side note on the story of the Akedah. L'hoiroi simchosoi v'chafetzoi l'malos rotzoi koinoi v'la'asois nachas ruach liyotzroi. Why? What is the key to Zrizis? It's not just that it gets done immediately. It is an illustration that the person, in this case Avraham Avinu, is driven by a desire to please and serve and be connected with Hashem. Again, we all have chores that we do begrudgingly and chores that we do enthusiastically. And when, it's the classic thing. My mother is mother, you get what you get and you don't get upset. My mother is grandmother. Do you want your cheese sandwich cut in circles or in stars? Meaning, when it's done with great enthusiasm, that's an illustration that you are enthusiastic. It's not just a sort of artificial paste on. It is an illustration that this is something that is meaningful and exciting and celebratory, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the core message that we're trying to illustrate. Again, not only the value in it being done, but it is the indication that this is done with enthusiasm. Again, we've all had people do us a favor, like you're doing you a favor, and people do you a favor with enthusiasm and passion, and they're excited to do it, and so on. When it's the first day of school, the kid oversleeps. It's the first day of camp, they wake up first thing in the morning. Why? Because this is what they're enthusiastic about. So by Avram doing it immediately, it's not just that he got it done and he didn't wait a week. It's that it was the manifestation of the overall enthusiasm.
But if you do a mitzvah begrudgingly, it's still.
Yeah, of course, right. Remember we talked about the bird with the wings. A bird without wings is still a living creature. A mitzvah without enthusiasm is still a mitzvah, but it's kind of missing the core. A bird without wings, it's a bird, it's a living creature, but it's sort of missing the whole distinctive characteristic of birdness, of what it means to be a bird. We met Lamda Razal, and from here, our sages use this as a launching pad to teach us a general rule. Likiyum kol ha-mitzvahs b'chlal, ubefrat ma'aseh hatzedakah, ha'olah kulana, to do all mitzvahs in general, and particularly, and here the Alter Rebbe uses a specific phrase, which we're going to revisit, the word ma'aseh hatzedakah. Now, ma'aseh hatzedakah translates as the deed of tzedakah. A ma'aseh is an action. But later we're going to use a different word, which is the word is avoda, which we're going to talk, which is a labor. And again, it's not just like, I think in English when we say something is a labor, it's like harder, but we don't mean it that way here. We mean it's like more transformative as opposed to just the action, which we'll get to. So just sort of highlight that one. And what is specific about tzedakah, meaning since it's true of all mitzvahs, here as well, the ma'aseh tzedakah, the Alter Rebbe is making this sort of lateral connection from the story of Avram that everything should be done b'zrizis. I mean, especially this, which is the most, I'll use the word distasteful of actions to bring his son up for the slaughter, but he does it with such zrizis. So certainly, and again, because it illustrates his enthusiasm to be close with Hashem, that's the distinctive characteristic. Well, we can take from there to go to the next level that we should have passion and enthusiasm, which is expressed in the urgency of it in all mitzvahs. I mean, referencing before Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Olav Shalom, of course, when he says it, it sounds like maple syrup, but he said about the Rebbe, he has the two primary characteristics, urgency and practicality. But when he says it, you're just like, well, whatever he said, I believe. But it's that idea, like this urgency. It's not like, okay, like it's got to be. And there's so many stories. Just one that comes to mind is a man. I mean, I knew him a little bit. He lived in England and he was a businessman. This is in the 70s. And he flew to Detroit and he went to this bakery like early in the morning, had a flight, and he struck up a conversation. And the guy was, I think maybe was a survivor, maybe was a Russian immigrant. And the Rebbe was talking about tefillin. He said, hey, let's put on tefillin. So they put on tefillin. So he says, you ever go to shul? He says, I can't go to shul because I have to be here so early in the bakery. You put on tefillin? I don't have tefillin. So the guy, this man who was a wealthy man, he says, well, if I get you tefillin, will you put on tefillin every day? So he says, yes, if you get me tefillin, I'll keep it here in the bakery and I promise you I'll put on tefillin. I was so happy. He says, okay, I'll be back in 2 weeks and I'll get you the tefillin. You see what the story said it already, right? So he comes to New York and he's so proud. He's going to get an extra Yaksha Koach from the Rebbe. And he tells the Rebbe this whole story, and I'm going back in 2 weeks, and then he's going to tefillin. Chris says, 2 weeks, what's going to do for 2 weeks? He says, I don't know, the guy's been on tefillin in 20 years, 2 weeks. The Rebbe says, go back to Detroit right now and get him the tefillin, because he's got to put on tefillin in the morning. So at those days, I mean, there was no FedEx or whatever, so the way he tells the story, and he's planning to go to England, So he goes to Kingston Avenue, he buys a pair of tefillin, things have changed, right? He goes to the airport, he goes to some gate that's going to Detroit, he finds a Jew, he says, give him the tefillin, he tells him the whole story. The guy says he'll deliver the tefillin. Imagine today, but that would never happen, right? But that's the Rebbe's point, meaning, I guess there's two things. One is you have to put on tefillin every day. So what are you gonna do for 2 weeks? That's A. And B is the guy says he's gonna put on tefillin. If he's gonna see how you put so much effort that he couldn't even miss a day, so then the next time he's tired and this and that, he goes, oh wow, this guy made such an effort. I'm gonna make sure to put on tefillin every single day because look how important it is. But if you wait 2 weeks, wait 3 weeks, it ceases to be as urgent. So that this is the idea that we learn from Avraham Avinu. The Alter Rebbe makes this, I'm calling it this lateral connection, that every mitzvah, because when it's done with enthusiasm, again, imagine you're the recipient. If it's done like, slump shoulders, like it's a nuisance, okay, I'm still glad he did it. But if he's all excited to do it, then I know that it's really been done out of concern and out of love and joy and the desire to make Hashem happy. And particularly when it comes to tzedakah, ha'olah kulana, which surpasses all mitzvahs, hamegina, because tzedakah, all the different virtues, it protects a person, or matzela, it rescues the person, with its benefits in this world. We say it as part of the morning davening. We say these are the matters that we enjoy the benefits of them in this world, and the principle is waiting for us in the world to come. And included amongst them is tzedakah. We call mini peronios hamasrakshos. It protects us from all types of punishment. There's a story, he gets a little reprimanded, but Nebuchadnezzar, who was a bad guy, foresaw the downfall, and he went to Daniel and he said, what can I do? And he said, well, there are these poor people, and if you will support them, it will protect you. Later, Daniel was punished for that because he's giving good ideas. I mean, it's a hard thing. All these people are starving. This guy, if Jeffrey Epstein, no relations, is going to give $1 million to feed poor people, are we going to not take it? It's a hard thing to calibrate. But the idea is we see that giving tzedakah can protect even bad people, and so on. Like you see it, like it says, the tzedakah tatzal mimavis. Tzedakah will save you, even God forbid, from a sentence of death. And certainly all forms of suffering that are less harsh and horrific than death. And it therefore is certainly that much better in this physical world, not only at a spiritual world, to preface it, to do it earlier, as much as you possibly can, because we are being judged every day. This is a common theme, meaning we all show up on Rosh Hashanah, we get written for a good year, Yom Kippur sealed for a good year. Why do I have to come the rest of the year? Because every day, how is it going to be allocated? How is that bounty going to be allocated each day? And tzedakah is that calibration to make it holy. Okay, the letter now sort of makes a little bit of a shift, and it starts to talk about the value of the repeated giving. Remember, we posed the question, which doesn't seem unreasonable. Why do I have to put it in the tzedakah every day? The courier is coming in 4 months. I'll give him one big lump sum. So the Alter Rebbe has spoken about doing things with urgency, as we said here, immediately. And now he's going to emphasize, yes, you have a question? You have to unmute, though, because we can't hear you. We can't hear you. You have to unmute.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. The concept that you're talking about of the giving daily and the making it sort of part of the routine, does that kind of tie in with Netzach? Or I'm on the
yeah, it's similar with that it becomes committed and ongoing. Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. However, or not in contrast, but in continuation, we see, and we find and we see, and here the Alter Rebbe uses this phrase, ba'avoidis hatzedakah, with the translation is like the labor or the service. I think in English those sound more like burdens, but it doesn't mean in that way. It's like there's a deed, but then in avodah, it's like an exercise. I mean, you have to push yourself to do more. So if you're accustomed to 5 pounds, you have to do 7 pounds. Otherwise, you're not really going to get any stronger. Now, it's true. If you do the 5 pounds, you'll maintain, but we're not just looking to maintain. We're looking to exceed. And you recall from much earlier in Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe talks about the transformation that a person has with avoida. And the classic illustration is, in Hebrew, there's a phrase, ibud oiros, the same word avoida, with leather. So you see this big burly bull, right? And the thick skin, and then they work it, or whatever they do it, and they turn into the soft leather we make shoes and belts and wristwatch bands from, and so on. It becomes soft. Now, that's not going to happen inevitably. That's not like grass growing taller. That requires enormous effort. So we are all trying to refine ourselves. So how do we refine ourselves? If we just do what we do, we're not going to, get any better. We'll maintain. Was not better than regressing, but we're not just here for, well, it's better than worse. In order for there to be transformation, there needs to be labor and effort and what's the word I'm looking for, and striving. Otherwise, we wind up, just plateauing. So that's here the Alter Rebbe is using the word avoidus hatzedakah. Earlier, a couple of lines before, we talked about ma'isa hatzedakah. Again, in English, it doesn't really capture it, the acts of tzedakah versus the avoida, this labor where I'm pushing myself beyond myself. Maila prati is gedela, this very particular virtue, the nifla, that is gedela and nifla. So what is gedela and nifla? So in English, we translate them as big and wondrous. Okay, but the idea is it is far more than the investment. So again, using physical exercise is probably an analogy. So a person maintains. When they push themselves, they get like an advantage. They get more than just what they have done. And it transforms. And again, I don't know all the biochemistry, but the endorphins or whatever it is that get better. So the person gets physically stronger. They get their whole body moving, the lungs, the heart, the blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. Well, this is that idea. It is incomparable to just the Maisa HaTzedakah, just the Tzedakah act, this Avodah, where I am overcoming my tendencies. Nasim b'pamim rabos, that it is done many times. And that's the value. So if I have $100 to give, it's more meaningful, not meaningful is the wrong word, but it's more transformative if I give $1 100 times than if I give $100 one time. And again, we can imagine even at a very simple level. It's like, okay, I'll do it. And it's like, okay, I did it versus like every day. And again, we think about this in relationships. I'll just take my kid to the mall. I'll just take him to the zoo. The rest of the week, don't bother me. I'll just give him one really super day and so on. And the rest of the time, don't bother me. Or I'll just, buy him one big fancy thing and then that's it. So, it's a certain strategy. And maybe the kid's like, okay, fine. I'd rather go fishing once a week and not talk to me, then you just do these sort of incremental things. But again, I think as we recognize, the incremental is going to be more meaningful. And whoever does more, this is to be praised. It's a little bit of a play on the phrase from the Haggadah. You remember that even though we're all wise and all knowledgeable, all understanding, there's a mitzvah, and whoever goes at length to tell the story is to be praised. And then we tell the story about these rabbis who stayed up until the morning sun. To why they know it already. It's not because they're reviewing the data, but because it's avoided. They were finding a new meaning and so on. And again, like we always point out at the Seder, we say, well, I know this one. We did this last year. I know this one. Well, that's the point. It's got to have deeper meaning, more significance. And as evidenced by these great rabbis, they certainly knew all the data. It wasn't like they were unfamiliar with the information. It was the transformative experience that was meaningful in their life experience. And not just to do it once, in one go. And again, that's the idea. I call it hold your nose and just do it because I have to, but to do it multiple times. Even though you're going to get the same total. It's the same $100 if I do $100 once, or if I do $1 100 times, but there is a value in this. They made talk about this even in the sense of, you'd rather have 100 customers who pay $1 than one customer pays $100 because you lose that customer, you're out of luck, and this is what happens, oops, that whole model is gone. Rambam Zal, like the Rambam writes, the Ferish HaMishnah in his commentary on the Mishnah, Shoshanu Chachamim, where the sages say, V'akol lefi roiv hamaisa. It is all about the abundance of activity. This is the quote from Pirkei Avos that we talked about before. And there the Rambam explains that this habituation through multiple actions, in contrast to just, like I said, do it once, and a little bit do it once means I don't really want to do it. So, okay, I'll just do it and then I'm done. And again, my analogy, like jumping in the pool, I'm just going to force myself. I'm not really learning how to jump in the pool. I just did it. Like I went on the roller coaster. Okay, I did it and I'm done and I don't want to think about it again. It's not very, it's not as pleasant, even though I'm the recipient on the one hand, he gets the $100. Okay, he's happy, but there's a disconnect associated. Even though the Rambam does in fact explain this very thoroughly, but the fact is he doesn't really say. Rambam's point, which is about this habituation, is sort of the sum total. The Alter Rebbe is sort of extracting it from Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, chapter 3, Mishnah 15, as we talked about. The Alter Rebbe sort of describes it as the Rambam's. Maybe that's how the Alter Rebbe saw it, but if we were to open up the Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah, that's all you're going to basically see is you're going to habituate yourself, and he doesn't use this term, obviously, but it's like a muscle memory, like we talk about with playing an instrument or any other skill, practice, practice, practice. But the Alter Rebbe describes it in that way. So he says, because the goal here is to change, literally to polish or to purify, make clear the neshama. We got this conflict between body and soul, and the soul is made clear, it's more expressed through abundance of activity, not the greatness of the activity, but through doing it many, many times. There is this characteristic. This is a clear pasuk. Now, curiously, this is actually a combination of two psukim. Again, the Alter Rebbe is not just trying to give a scholarly bibliography. He's kind of combining two psukim, but he's here to make the point, which is pulas tzedakah l'chaim. That is the action of tzedakah. The activity is for life. Mechaya chaim ein sof baruch hu, from the source of all life, the life of life. That's literally how it translates. The life or the giver of life, the infinite one. Le'eretz hachaim, to the land of life. Now, the land of life is a Kabbalistic terminology, a term that references what's called Malchus of Atzilus. I'm just going to sort of leave that for a moment. We'll come back to it, okay? Now, in our context, the Alter Rebbe is kind of alluding to that. He's kind of borrowing that phrase to be a reference to Eretz Yisrael. What's the land of life? It's Eretz Yisrael. Like the Rebbe says, everybody knows when you say Holy Land, you mean Eretz Yisrael, right? People, they like it's their land. So nobody thinks it's any other place. So Eretz HaChaim, the land of life, means Eretz Yisrael. It has a Kabbalistic explanation, which we'll talk about. But in this context, the Alter Rebbe is sort of making this, I don't know what the word is, this symmetry, where we talk about how the verse says, an activity of tzedakah for life, Hashem is the source of life, to the land of life, which is the land of Eretz Yisrael. Even though it's a little bit of a poetic license, because the term Eretz HaChaim is really a Kabbalistic term, that's a reference to the Malchus level of Atzilus, not to Eretz Yisrael specifically. But again, the Alter Rebbe is sort of borrowing it in that poetic license sense. We'll come back to it in a moment to talk about what it means there, but it's worth mentioning at this point. He Shchinas Uzenu. This is like the Shechina, the divine presence. Remember, the Shechina means, like, the word comes from the word for a neighborhood. A shchuna is a neighborhood. The Mishkan, all play off the same word, is where God resides. A shachin is a neighbor. So it means where God is part of the community, where God interfaces with the community. Uzenu, of our strength. Shaleh Nema, regarding which it says, Ba'ata, and you, which is God in everything. Remember, we've talked about this before. All the names of Hashem describe some aspect of Hashem. You is like your whole being. It's like you, like everything about you. That is Hashem in his essence. Mechayes kulam, give life to all of them. Bihi, which is a reference to, and again, these are quotes that the Alter Rebbe is sort of using in a poetic sense. Sukkos David Hanefel. That's Ada Offer, which is a reference to the sukkah, not the sukkah like we sit on Sukkos, but the idea of the Mishkan, which was temporary, like the sukkah of David. Because remember, David couldn't build the temple, but then it ultimately fell down into the earth, which is the idea of we're being spread out in exile. Kamayim Razal, like it says, Galu Edom, when they were exiled to Edom. Edom is Esau. It was red. Remember with the soup. He was called Edom because the soup was red. So the Edom nation, which is basically the forebearer of Rome, and so on, is Esav. It represents indulgence and unsatiable pleasure seeking. When we went to the Edom, the Shechina came with us. Now, I just want to do a couple lines and we'll come back. That when we will demonstrate, because remember our rule of thumb that Hashem treats us the way we treat others. So when we will demonstrate that we will lift up those who have fallen down, which is a reference to the poverty in Eretz Yisrael. So that is what we call is Sarusa de Lasata, our initiation. We initiate it. That they literally have nothing. Again, these are all Kabbalistic phrases and quotes that are sort of the scholarly way of writing. They don't just say it in simple talk. They use all this kind of, there's a word from it. I don't know what it's called in English. In Hebrew, you have like malitzas. It's like, people who are always quoting Shakespeare and Hobbes and so on. So it's a certain scholarly style. So these people, they have nothing of their own. This phrase, they have nothing of their own, is a Kabbalistic idea that the creations are just the product of Hashem, but it's borrowed phrase. They have nothing. They have no way to support themselves. It's not because they're being lazy. It's not because they're literally out there impoverished trying to fight with the land to produce some crops and so on. So then when we act in this way, we get a responsive, it's Rusa de La'ela, a response from Hashem, especially for those who will be so committed to support the people of the living land. Again, that reference to before, which again is a reference here to Eretz Yisrael. So just to back up and cover a couple of what these terms mean in their origin, they're borrowed here. So we talk about this idea of Eretz Achaim, the land of life. The land of life is a Kabbalistic term that refers to, remember, Malchus, which is the expression. It's the act of kinging. So the king is this exalted person. His acts of kinging are simple things: stop signs, taxes, laws, very tangible human things that we can appreciate. Sometimes we might say, well, that's it. Stop, try living without it. So they're very simple things, but in that loftiest level of Atzilus. But the idea is that it's brought down into this land. It's brought down into the inanimate. And it's bringing the loftiest levels of holiness into the most tangible experiences of the land. So Hashem it gives life, just like we know. What is dirt? It's dirt. Yeah, it's not. That's life in there, because you plant a seed and you get a tree, and you get a tree, and you get fruit, and fruit produces more trees and more fruits and so on. So whereas we look at the soil and think it's, we treat it like dirt, pardon the pun, but really there's life in there because that's what nourishes. Well, this is sort of the same idea. We're going through these characteristics. Again, we talked about the Shechina, the fallen level of David. Again, it reaches down to the most ordinary of circumstances that Hashem has done. So again, backing up, the Alter Rebbe says, Hashem is the source of all life. Eretz Yisrael is the land of life. When we will, of our own volition, meaning we're not being compelled from, it's not the product of a miracle, will be generous towards those people who have nothing of their own, which again is a Kabbalistic term that describes creation. It has no innate existence. It's the product of Hashem. Well, then Hashem will respond in abundance, in generosity towards us. And everyone who will contemplate this wondrous matter, he will find a good and strong understanding. How great is the words of our sages. This is the Pirkei Avos. That say, it is all according to the abundance of actions. Not just how great the action is, but the abundance of those actions. How many times? The action of tzedakah, that is done many, many times. To draw down this highest level of life, and again, life directly from Hashem. To unify this divinity many, many times. And this is similar to what the Rambam writes, which is really more of what the Alter Rebbe elaborates from the Rambam on his commentary. There's Rambam's commentary on that quote in Pirkei Avos, where he talks about why, in fact, there is this particular virtue to the multiple activities. Lezachech hanefesh, to clear up the soul. I mean, in English doesn't work that well, but the idea is that the soul is often smothered in the physical. I'm hungry, I'm tired, and the soul doesn't get to express itself, but now it gets a clearer way. We become more transparent of the godliness. Like the Zohar describes, the Shechina, that the divine presence that is God in this world, Nikras Nefesh is called the Nefesh. Remember, Nefesh is basic existence. An inanimate object has Nefesh. It exists. God is making it exist. That quality of existence is Nefesh. And there's a tendency to think God is in the lofty, holy, spiritual things, and that kind of ordinary stuff, well, can't be bothered, or it's sort of a nuisance, and so on. And we're taking quite the opposite. That's where we find the most profound illustration of godliness. Because Hashem is the source of our life. So again, that's a very tangible sense. Money which is the most limited thing, because $5 is not $6. It's not even like kindness, which is also limited to the parameter of kindness, but it's not so rigid. And then when I can transform that and turn that into something of sanctity, wow, now I've really done something distinctive. You can see, like it says, for my discussion is the dust of my soul. That's why our sages say, that how great is tzedakah that it brings the geula. Why is tzedakah bring the geula more than anything else? Because it illustrates the non-separation of the most material thing, money, from the most spiritual thing, Hashem himself. So we tend to think, there's a story that when the Rebbe came to visit camp in the 1950s, so they took the Rebbe on the tour. So in the dining room, there was a big sign. It was something like, money is the root of all evil. Leave some roots here or something. Tip your waiter. It was this kind of funny thing. So the Rebbe looked at it and they were a little embarrassed. And the Rebbe said, not necessarily. Money is not always the root of evil. I mean, that's a throwaway line. It's not always. It can do a lot of good stuff. Okay, it's written in a comical sense. Lavdaf, it's not always a bad thing. It's not the root of evil. It depends what you do with it. So again, here you can take something that's so rigid, so defined, nothing more defined than money, and you can utilize it and you can transform it into something spiritual. To elevate it, to raise it up from the dust, yittel by yittel, of Shiloh, until we arrive in Shiloh, which is a reference to Eliyahu Hanavi coming into the city of Shiloh and heralding the Geula. All righty.